subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
Lists are something that you're going to use all the time in SharePoint. So in this section, we're really going to focus in on them and understand what they are, why we need them, and take a look at the different types of lists that we can create. So let's first answer the burning question, what exactly is a SharePoint list? Well, the way that I like to think about it is basically everything you work with in SharePoint is really a list. So if we just forget about SharePoint for one moment and just talk about lists in general. Now, it's probably the case that you're already familiar with lists in other applications. For example, Microsoft Excel. Now, as we know, Excel is used for many different things, but essentially what you're doing when you're working in Excel is you are managing rows of records, lists of information. And the general structure of a list is something that contains column headers at the top, and then with the respective records or items listed out underneath. But this, what you see in front of you right now, is basically just a list of information. And that's basically all SharePoint lists are. So if you can imagine for one moment taking this content from Excel and copying and pasting it into SharePoint, you would have yourself a SharePoint list. So let's now jump back into SharePoint and open up a list that I've already created so that you can see the difference. Now, I've created a few different lists in my SharePoint team site, but let's jump in and open up my Global Teach contacts. And you can see that I have a link for this in the Quick Launch menu on the left-hand side. So let's click and take a look. Now, I have a few different contacts already added to my training contacts list. And as you can probably see, these are not real people, but they do give you a little bit of insight as to what my favorite TV show is. And what can we see in here? Well, we can see those column headers. So running across the top, I have attachments, last name, first name, company, so on and so forth. And then underneath that, I have my records. So this is essentially very similar to the Excel spreadsheet that we were just looking at in its layout. So now that we understand what a SharePoint list is, let's look at a few other examples of different lists, because there are many different types of lists that you can create in SharePoint. So this one is a basic contacts list, but I also have some others that I've created. So what about this one here, Global Teach Tasks? Now, the first thing you'll notice when I come in here is that my view has changed. So as I mentioned at the beginning, you have that modern experience and the classic experience. And we're kind of in that phase where Microsoft are trying to move people away from the classic experience and towards the modern experience. Now, I have my settings set up to use the best experience for the particular page that I'm working on. And this time it's defaulted to the classic experience, which is why the interface does look very slightly different to the modern experience. But we can still see our list. So this one is a task list, and these are a couple of tasks that are currently assigned to me that I need to do. So I need to create a course outline for SharePoint Online, and I also need to research the SharePoint updates to add those into the course. I can see that both of these tasks have a due date, and then I have some links at the top where I can add a new task or edit the existing tasks. But again, this has the same structure. It has those column headings at the top, so task name, due date, assigned to, and then we have our records in rows underneath. Let's take a look at another example of a list. I'm going to go to my Quick Launch menu, and this time we're going to take a look at Global Teach Issues. Now, this one has defaulted back to the modern experience, and we have another list, but it has a completely different look and feel. And for this particular list, I've used one of the new templates in SharePoint Online to create this very nice looking issues tracker. But again, it is still essentially a list. We have our column headings running across the top, and then we have our records underneath. And the final example I'm going to show you here is this one, Global Teach Calendar. Let's click on this because this one does look a little bit different. So this time it's showing me my calendar, and you can see that I have a couple of events scheduled into this calendar. Now you might think to yourself, well, how is this a list? It looks nothing like the other lists that we've been looking at. Well, essentially it is still a list. It's just been formatted to take on the look and feel of a calendar. And this is a good point for me to also mention something else related to the layout. If you do find yourself switching between modern view and classic view, so right now it's switched me back into classic view, you'll find all of your menu options when you're in classic view are located on ribbons at the top here. So where I have events, if I click this, I get that ribbon structure, which we're very used to when we work in Microsoft products. So just be aware of that. Everything that you need to do with this particular list is located on a ribbon. Now I'm going to stay on this calendar ribbon for 1 second just to show you that this is in fact a list. If we go over to the Manage Views group just here, it says Current View and I'm showing it as a calendar. But if I click the drop down, what I could do is instead of displaying it as a calendar, if I select all events, take a look at what happens. It converts it to that list format. So we have both of those meetings listed there, but it's in a more standard structured list. I have my column headings running across the top and then my content. So just be aware of that. Even though the calendar doesn't technically look like a list, it just has calendar formatting over the top. Now in the next lesson, we are going to start to create our own list. And I'm going to show you how I built some of these. But before we do that, just to give you some kind of idea as to where you can go to see all of the different types of lists that you can create, let me show you a couple of different ways that you can do this. So I'm back on my home page, and if I decide that I want to create a new list, I can click on the New button at the top, and the first option I get here is List. I can choose to create a blank list. I can choose to create a list from data that already exists in something like Excel. So maybe I want to bring in those employees that I had in the spreadsheet at the beginning of this session into SharePoint as a list. I can definitely do that. Or I can choose an existing list that exists within SharePoint. And then underneath, I have some fancy new SharePoint templates. And it's this one here, the issue tracker, that I used for my Global Teach issues list. And you can see I have 8 of these new little templates, which have a really nice modern feel to them. I can use any of those if I want to create a list. Now it might be that the list that you want to create doesn't really match any of these templates we have down here. And if that is the case, there is somewhere else you can go to create your lists. And this is where you'll also find all of the additional templates that you have for creating lists and also creating things like libraries that we're going to get onto a bit later on in this course. So let's close down this window. What I can also do is go to App at the bottom of this list. It's going to jump me across to the site contents page and it's going to show me all of my apps. And all of these blue squares that you can see in here are either lists or libraries that you can add to your SharePoint site. So you can see at the top here, tasks. This is what I use to create my task list. If I scroll down, I have contacts. I could use that if I wanted to create a contacts list. Calendar, we've seen that one as well. We have issue tracking. We can even create our own custom list from here as well. So what these basically are templates for different lists. So they'll give you standard column headers that are related to that specific list. And of course, all of these templates can be customized, but they're a really great way to start creating a list so you don't have to do it from scratch. And it makes building new lists or new libraries a lot quicker and easier. All of these templates you can use to store your data. And in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how you can create a list. Now that we understand the concept of a list in SharePoint, let's jump into our site and create a brand new one. Now what I've actually done here is I've deleted the Global Teach task list that I've previously created. And we're going to go in and I'm going to show you how you can add a list. Now the first thing we need to do here is go up to the New button and click that drop down. And remember, there are 2 places that you can go in here to create a list. And where you go really depends on the type of list that you're looking to create. If I was to jump into the first option here, list, and take a look at my options, I can't really see anything in there related to tasks. So we're going to close that down and we're going to try the app option instead. So now I get those blue tiles. Remember, these represent different lists and libraries that you can add to your SharePoint site. And if we take a look in the top row, I can see there is the one that I want, the tasks list. And what these basically are templates, and pretty much everything you work with in SharePoint is based on a template. So it means that you don't really need to build anything from scratch. For example, when it comes to lists, you don't need to go in and define the columns that you want in your list because the template is going to do that for you. Now the first thing we need to do here is we need to give our list a name. Training tasks. Now one thing you'll notice here is that I don't have any spaces in that name. And this is really good practice to get into because the name that you put here is not only the one that the user sees, but it's also the name that shows up in the browser's URL. And what you'll find is that if you have spaces in the name, then the URL is going to contain some strange characters. What will happen is that wherever there is a space, it will be replaced with a percentage sign and a number 20. And that can leave your URLs looking a little bit messy. So I'm going to create it like this. We can go in and change the way it looks to the user at a later time. So let's leave it with no spaces and click on the Create button. Now what you'll notice is that it's jumped me back to the site contents area. And if you remember, this is where you can go to find all of the content that's stored in your site. So if you add something like a new list, as I've done here, you'll be able to find it in the site contents page. And if I take a look right at the bottom, the last record in here is training tasks. So this is actually the list that I've just created. Now again, a little bit of a difference if you're using the classic view in SharePoint as opposed to the modern view that I'm using. If you're using classic view, you'll find that your list will go straight into your quick launch menu on the left-hand side. But because I'm using the modern view, it doesn't actually put it there by default. Now I actually do want this to be listed out in my quick launch menu bar because this is where I have all of my other lists. So I have my contacts, my issues and my calendar. I want training tasks underneath here. So how can we move this to that quick launch menu? Well, it's actually a little more complex than you might think. Notice as I hover over the training tasks list, I get these 3 dots. When I click, it's going to show me more actions. And what I want to do here is jump into settings for this list. I then need to click on this first link at the top here, list name, description and navigation. And this is where I can say, yes, display this list on the quick launch menu. So I'm going to check the yes radial button and click on save. So let's refresh the page, and I'm going to do that by jumping back to home. And now you can see that I have training tasks in my quick launch menu. And if I click on training tasks, it's going to take me to a page where I can start to add in any tasks that I have. And if you take a look up at the URL, you can see what I'm talking about. So because I named this without any spaces, I don't have any strange characters lurking around in this URL. But the drawback of this is I don't actually want it to look like that to the user. So let's quickly go back to home and let's fix that. I'm going to go to my quick launch menu, and right at the bottom I have an edit button. And this is going to allow me to edit any of these items in this menu. So let's click the 3 dots next to training tasks and say edit. And now I'm just going to change this so that it matches everything else. So I'm going to add in global teach. We're going to put a hyphen in there, and let's put a space in there as well, so it looks similar to everything else, and click on OK. Another thing I'm going to want to do here is I don't want site contents in the middle. I want all of my lists together. So I want to move my training tasks further up this quick launch menu. Once again, if we click on the 3 dots, we can select Move Up to rearrange the order. Click on Save, and that looks a lot better now. So let's jump into our training task list. And one more time, I'm going to refer you to the URL because even though we've changed the name that the user sees in the menu, if you take a look at the actual URL, it still says training tasks. Now, because we're using a task template for this, the column headings for my list are already defined. So I have checkmark, task name, due date, and assigned to. So now all I need to do is go in and add my tasks. Now another thing you'll notice here is that now that I've created a task list, I have my ribbons at the top. So if I click on tasks, that's going to drop down that ribbon, and I have another tab here called list, and basically I can find all of the things I might want to do with this list somewhere on either of these ribbons. Now one little thing I would advise you to check in here is the list settings. So all the way over in the settings group on the end, if you click list settings, this should look a little bit familiar because we came in here when we were assigning our task list to our quick launch menu. Now there are so many different settings that you can change for your lists. But they are split down into 3 groups. We have general settings, permissions and management, and communications. So this is where you can find all of your general list settings. And it's definitely worth having a little dig around in here just to make sure that everything is set up to work in the most efficient way for you. In the list in the middle, we have permissions and management options. So we can do things like delete this list. We can change the permissions for this list. We can set up workflow settings, all good stuff like that. And we are going to be dipping in and out of this as we go through the course. So I would definitely advise you to jump into here and have a little dig around and definitely check these settings prior to creating your first list. So now that we have our training task list created, the next thing to do is add some tasks. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing in the next lesson. In the previous lesson, I showed you how to create a task list in SharePoint. And in this lesson, we're going to populate this list with some new tasks. And this process is extremely simple. Now, before we get on to that, I just want to point out to you something which you may have already noticed. If you glance up into the header area, you'll notice that the header still says training tasks with no space. And this is probably something I should have changed when we were in the list settings, but I forgot. But not to worry, we can go back and do that now. So I want to update this so that it displays the same wording as what I have in the Quick Launch menu. So I want it to say Global Teach Training Tasks. So for this, we need to jump back into our list settings. So if we go up to our ribbons and click on List, all the way over to the settings group on the end and click the List Settings button. And we want to jump into List Name, Description and Navigation. And this is where we can change the name and description. So I'm going to change this to the same as the Quick Launch menu. So that is Global Teach Training Tasks, and click on Save. And now you'll see that that is looking a lot better. Now that we've done that, we can go in and start populating this list with some tasks that need to be completed. So just above where we have our column headings, and remember these are based on the template that we used, we have a new task button. So let's click it, and this opens up some fields that we can complete. Now you'll notice that the only one that has an asterisk next to it is task name. So that is the only mandatory field that you're required to complete in order to be able to save this record. So if I just had a task name in there, I could save this. It wouldn't really have any information in it, but I could do that. If I don't complete the task name, then I'm not going to be able to save the record. So let's add a new task. I can then add in a start date and a due date for this particular task. So maybe I want to start this, let's say next Monday, and I need to finish this by the Monday after that, so the 21st. I can then choose if I want to assign this to somebody. So it might be that I want to assign this task to somebody in my team, or I could even assign it to myself. And that is exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to start to type my name. My name has come up in the list below, so I can just select and then click Save to save this task to my list. And one thing you'll notice here is that new tasks will have a little green icon next to the task name. And really that is just indicating that that is a new item that you've added to your list. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to add another new task. Now what we're going to do this time is, if you take a look right at the bottom, we have a little link that says Show More. And if I click this, this is going to give me some more information that I can add for this specific task. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another task, and I'm going to say Research SharePoint Updates. I'm going to give it a start date of tomorrow and a due date of, let's say, Thursday. I'm going to assign it to myself. And I can even enter in a percentage complete. Now, I haven't started this yet, so I'm going to leave it at 0%. But if you wanted to keep track of progress on your tasks, you could come back in here and edit this percentage. I can even add predecessors in here. And you can see it's currently showing the other tasks that I added. So if I had more tasks in this list, they would all show in here. And if one of these tasks needs to be complete before I can start this task, I can add that as a predecessor simply by selecting the task and clicking Add. I can also choose a priority for this task, and I'm going to leave this on normal, and also a task status, so I can specify whether this is in progress, not started, completed, deferred, or waiting on someone else. So I'm going to say not started and click on save. So extremely simple to add tasks into a task list. Now, what if I want to go in and modify one of these tasks? It's going to make sense that I might need to do something like that, particularly as I work on these tasks. I'm probably going to want to update the progress. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. So let's say we want to edit this last task that we added, Research SharePoint Updates. I can click on the link to open the task, or alternatively, I can click on the three dots and then the three dots again, and I have an edit item button in here as well. But to be honest with you, it is a bit quicker just to click on the task name. So that's going to jump you back into your task, and then you can make whatever updates you need to make. So let's pretend that this is 50% done, and I'm going to change the status to in progress and click on save. The final thing I want to show you here is what happens when you mark a task as complete. So again, we're going to go back into Research SharePoint Updates. We're going to click on the link this time. And when you click on the link, it does just take you into a view-only mode. If you want to edit any of this information, you need to jump up to that View ribbon and click the Edit Item button. So now I'm going to say that this is 100% complete, and I'm going to change the task status to completed and click on Save. And take a look what's happened. My task is now showing with a strike through. So every time you do complete a task, it's going to show in your list just like that. Now you could go in and delete tasks that you've completed. I would advise against doing this because I know from my own experience that sometimes it's good to be able to go back and really take a look at the tasks that you've completed. Now once your list of tasks grows a bit longer, you might find that over time you have many items showing there with a strike through, so many items that have been completed. And you might think to yourself, well, I don't really need these. Do I want to delete them? And you might think to yourself, it's going to be a lot easier for me to see the tasks that I need to see if I delete out all of the completed tasks. Well, you could do that if you wanted to, but in the next lesson, we're going to discuss deleting list items in a bit more detail.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.